Hello, everybody. Welcome to Disabilities Redefined with Dr. Wagner. I am Dr. Truett Wagner. And on this episode, you are going to meet one of the premier disability advocates and educators in the United Kingdom, Hannah Hoskins. She has her name on everything from a very successful jewelry line to a very well discussed and controversial podcast, Am I Disabled Now? I always tell people, go to her Instagram page, which is Not Your Grandma's UK, and you will find everything you need to know about this very intelligent, very dynamic young woman. Meet Hannah Hoskins.
How do you define ableism?
Okay, so ableism is kind of a tricky one because the issue is that ableism is much more subtle than we think it is. A lot of people will assume that ableism is just someone discriminating against someone who has a disability. However, in society, we have a lot of what we call microaggressions, which are little instances where disability is seen as less than. So it will be in things like someone asking me when they see me with my walking stick, what is wrong with you? Because the emphasis there is that there's something wrong for me to be using a walking stick. So ableism is really those sorts of like where you put disability down as being a less than. Like another one that I get quite commonly is I couldn't live like you, which again says I couldn't, I wouldn't be able to survive in the way that you have to survive. And therefore, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't even imagine how awful that would be. And that's constantly telling me that my life is awful and that my life is less than and it's worth less. And that's really what ableism in a nutshell is. But it's those little everyday things and it builds up, and it's those constant things of having to explain, no, my life isn't awful just because I use a walking stick. No, my life isn't awful just because I have a really bad chronic fatigue issue. Yes, it's not all roses and prettiness, but at the same time, it's not the worst thing in the world. And I still have good things in my life. And the problem is we assume disability is the worst thing that can happen to you. And it's
What is your viewpoint on ableism within the disabled population?
So it's kind of difficult. I
Yes.
think there's twofold bits in there. There is the kind of, like you say, there's an issue in terms of different disabilities have different ways of perspectives on it. There's obviously a lot of conversation in the terms of even down to like person first language and identity first. So person first being, just for anyone who doesn't know, person first being that you put the person before the disability, and you say, I'm a person with a disability, or identity first, which is what I use, which is I am disabled. Like that's it, done. Don't need to add anything else.
And thank you for that. And thank you for that. A lot of people use it for people who don't know. A lot of people don't know that.
No,
Yeah.
it's something I didn't know when I started. So I was like, what is everyone talking about? And why are they so angry about it? Like, why do they have a go at each other about this? And it was very, very confusing to me because there isn't really that explanation. The issue in terms of disability is there is what you could call a disability hierarchy, which is kind of what you were talking about in the sense that some people who are able to work or who are able to do more things than other disabled people will maybe look down on that system or look down on their ability or productivity. And the issue really comes in, disability is the biggest minority that anyone can be part of at any time. There is no limits to this. So the range of disability, and I suppose it goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning, in the sense that disability isn't just one thing. So
Yes.
There's as many different disabilities as there are people, full stop. Two people of the same disability, like me, if I meet someone else who has fibromyalgia, the amount of difference of what we can do or how it affects us is completely different. So there is that dichotomy in the sense of there's so many different ways to be disabled and the identities that we have that include that.
Yes.
So then in terms of that, also, if you're part of the disability community, you're more likely to also be part of another minority community as well. Just percentages go up, which means that the way that you see the world or the way the world treats you is very different depending on where you fall within those things. The other thing, I mentioned earlier that 80% of us become disabled and are not born disabled. So not only that is, community is so important in that transition because you have to learn how to be a disabled person. However, even the 20% who are born disabled may not have access to other disabled people or the community, in which case they have an ableist view on life because they will have been brought up with people who are not disabled, who will then say things like, I see you, not the disability, you can always work past your disability shouldn't be an excuse, which is fine to an extent for some people. But for some people, that's really damaging. And so it really depends on how much connection we have to community, which is again why I started the podcast, because it's about that information. It's about what are we talking about? Because we don't in general talk about disability. When you become disabled, you have no idea. So you have to then train yourself to be disabled whilst you train everybody else around you about what disability means. Right. And so where the ableism comes in is you get all of that. And then on top of that, you get people who will then say, like, I will say that you are a non-disabled person. However, some people in the community would call you an able-bodied person. And then that kind of puts a barrier between me and you and says, well, you're able-bodied, but it also puts a barrier between other people who are maybe have mental health issues. So they're not physically disabled, but they have health issues that are mental health issues, so they are disabled, right. In which case that then puts a barrier between them. And what we're talking about when we talk about the ableism within the community is right. That there's all of these barriers because of all of these different people coming together from different aspects of life. And not understanding each other because no one's talking about it. And so really what my work is all about is literally going, right, okay, I hear you. These are all the different points of view. Let's just talk this through. Let's just kind of break it down into the most simplest thing. I'm not saying anyone's right or wrong. We're just going to go with, here's the information. Make your own mind up. Well, and that's okay. But it's also about finding the sameness as well within those stories. There is a similarity. Like, yes, there's a lot of differences. However, we all have to go through navigating what it's like to live in a world in which it's steeped in ableism and constantly tells you that you're less than and that you're maybe not as good just because you're disabled or you can't do things, or they expect you to be inspirational and that you must do certain things and you can't live up to that because you're just shopping, and people walk up and go, oh, you're so inspirational.
Oh yeah,
I've had it, like my favorite one is one of my friends being like, I was eating crisps in the supermarket aisle and someone called me inspirational.
Okay, so as we're winding up, social media.
Yes.
Yes. Do you think it's been a good thing or bad thing within the
For me, I think it's the best thing that I ever could have had. I would never have understood my disability, let alone what treatments were available to me. Like, I've learned more from my community than I have learned from any single professional who has seen me. Because we share information, we share treatment options and all sorts of things. I'm careful not to talk about too much about what exactly I personally take, because I think I'm not someone who's in a position to be able to say that kind of thing, and it's so different for every single person. But right. I've been part of groups where people have shared that, who have either been doctors or have had a medical background and therefore are able to share that kind of thing. So it's the access that I get has led me down to having far better treatment than I ever would have had I not had the community. Even down to learning how to talk to my doctors. So that's another thing that I talk a lot about, is how to actually talk to medical professionals, because we talk very different languages. And so it's really important to understand those things. And again, having the internet is the only way that I would have known that. However, obviously it can be a hellhole of trolls and all sorts of things.
But I know, again, as you know, we met actually under a thunderstorm of but listen, it's all worth hearing.
Yeah.
Because some of those people that attacked, I'm friends with them now on Instagram. I reached out to them and I was like, I didn't mean any harm with the statement that I responded to. And they were like, well, what do you do and what is your background and da-da-da. So I actually made a few friends. And I think it's important, though, to say, yes, it can be a hellhole. But if you reach out and communicate, more often than not, if somebody's willing, it can end in a very positive way.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think you can educate each other in, it was through the fact that we both were happy to talk to each other in terms of going, okay, I may not get your point of view, but here's mine, tell me more about yours, rather than saying, I will not listen to you. We both had open minds. And I think it depends on how you do that. Like, I think, again, a lot of that comes from, where we have the internal issues with disability politics and the way disabled people talk to each other. The only way that we can move forward is by having that open mind and saying, like, nobody's right. It's all, we're going back to that again of no one's right. We have, there's no set way of doing this. You don't have to have a certain way of being disabled at all.
Right.
And what you choose for yourself is perfectly fine, but you cannot always expect others to choose the same.
Wow. How do you define activism?
Ooh, that's a tough one. So I think there's two things in it. First of all is that you don't have to be an activist if you're disabled. I think there is this absolute incorrect idea, because we have to educate so many people about disability as we're going through it. Like, we're expected to be activists. It's almost a written rule that if you're disabled, you just talk for all the disabled people, and that is not okay. Like, we need to get rid of that. So there is absolutely no expectation to be an activist. I choose to do it personally because it was the information that I needed when I first started going through this. And so really all of my stuff is just a love letter to past me saying, hey, it's okay, Hannah. This was really, really hard. It completely changed your life. You had no idea what you're doing, but it's fine and it gets better. And that's what I needed to hear, because I needed to hear that it was possible to still have a life that I loved. In between not being able to get off the sofa for 10 minutes every day, I needed to know that there was something out there for me. And I think even if you can't get off the sofa for more than 10 minutes, even if you are bedridden, there is still a life for you and you're still worth it, know? And that's the thing. And I never knew that. And that's what the activism is about for me, is telling those people who might not hear that story otherwise, might not hear from someone who also went through the same thing as them or goes through the same thing as them, that it's okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.